Good morning, Mrs. Bush's third graders. Our story for today is Sweet Clara and the Freedom Quilt by Deborah Hopkinson and illustrated by James Ransom. While reading this story, we will use our journals to write our free responses. This will help us to become active readers. In the VACA text, chapter 12, the strategy that I'm going to go over today was free response journals. And free response writing allows students to become involved with the reading process, and it allows students to offer their opinion and emotions on the text in a safe environment, and so they don't feel pressure. Santa and colleagues said during this part of the text that this method of free response promotes inferential, evaluative, and analytical thinking in students. And this text suggested some prompts that might help students to write. And one is comments about what I think an unfamiliar word might mean. So students could journal a free response about what they think a word might mean. They can make predictions, maybe, what's going to happen next, is the author giving them any clues. And then an important part to remember is that any thought related to the story is correct. So there's no wrong answers, and you really want to emphasize this on students so that they will write for you. Some more prompts are things that I like or dislike about a character event, questions about things I do not understand, events from my life that come to mind as I read, and situations or events with which I do not agree with. You can create these as a class and go over them as a class. Maybe as a class you could create your own and then put them on a poster board or one of those big sheets and have them posted around your classroom. And let's say you could use this technique in a kindergarten classroom. You could just give them like a blank sheet of paper in which they draw what they think might happen next, or how they can relate the book to an event in their life, so they could draw a picture. If you step on up to like second, third grade, you could give them something that has lines where they write about what their free response is, maybe even draw a picture if you wanted to. And then let's say you're in 5th, 6th, 7th grade, you could have free response journals in which they had them in their desk, and anytime you were in different content areas, they could pull it out. If you just read a science section, then they could write about the science section they just read. You could use it in social studies reading. So it's a really great technique for across the curriculum. Okay, so how do you take the free response strategy and implement it into your classroom? Well, what you'd first do is have your students get out either their free response reading journals, or you can have them get out or pass out a sheet of paper for them. And so what I would do first in the classroom is I would introduce the book that we're reading today, Sweet Clara and the Freedom Quilt by Deborah Hopkinson, paintings by James Ransom. And you might want to give them some background information. I tied this literature in with our social studies, and it could be with the Civil War and slaves. So what I would do is remind students of the reading response prompts that we have come up with as a class, make sure that they know that there's no wrong answers. And what I'm going to ask of my student Hannah is to predict what she thinks that this story is going to be about. Sweet Clara and the Freedom Quilt. So I would give her 1 minute to write on her sheet what she predicts the story is going to be about. So Hannah is writing her response right now. All right, go ahead and finish the thought that you're on. Do I have a volunteer to share their response? Thank you, Hannah.
I think the story will be about Clara becoming either a free slave or something about how she escapes with the quilt she's made.
Okay, and so the next step is I will read Hannah part of the story, and then we'll stop again and free response write in our journals. Okay, Sweet Clara and the Freedom Quilt. Before I was even 12 years old, I got sent from North Farm to Home Plantation because they needed another field hand. When I got there, I cried so much they thought I was never going to eat or drink again. I didn't want to leave my mama. I'm going back to her, I whispered every day to young Jack, who worked beside me in the fields. Well, you better start eating all you can, sweet Clara. He smiled at me, but then his smile was gone. In a low voice, he say, or else you won't make it. Young Jack helped me believe I'd get back to my mama someday. Truth was, I'd be lost before I got through the fields, them being so big and all, but I didn't give up on dreaming. So I changed from a field hand to a seamstress. Since the sewing room was right off the kitchen, Aunt Rachel and I were near cook and the helpers. There was always lots of bustle and company in the kitchen. I was hearing about all kinds of new places and things. I listened so hard it felt like my ears must be growing right out of my head and getting big with listening. One day, 2 white men come to see the master. The drivers went into the kitchen to talk to cook. There'd been too many runaways last summer. One of them drivers said, "They going round asking all the masters in the county to join the patrollers." "Crazy running away," muttered Cook as she beat up some batter. "Where you going to get to, 'cept lost in the swamp?" "Dunno," said the owner. "But I hear we ain't that far from the Ohio River. Once you get that far, the Underground Railroad will carry you across." "That's right," agreed the first. "The railroad will get you all the way to Canada. Then you free forever." Cook snorted. "If it be as easy as you two let on, more would have gone." One of the men replied in a quiet voice, "It'd be easy if you could get a map." Now, what I want my students to do now is to, again, do a free response on their sheet of paper, in their journal, whatever they have, and they can talk about words that they didn't know, especially because there's some slang in this book that might be good, or they can maybe think about something in their own life. So I'm going to let Hannah write for a couple minutes about this. And so Hannah is starting to write about her second free response. Remember, there are no wrong responses. Go ahead and finish the thought that you're on. Do I have a volunteer? Thank you.
I don't agree with slavery and the details of it all. I think it was a low point and a high point at the same time for the United States to be in. I'm curious to know how this quilt will help Clara.
Very good. And so she's putting her thoughts down on paper, and it makes her feel more comfortable with what she's writing because there's no wrong answers, and then you can ask your class to share. And so I'm going to read another section of the book, and then we'll do this one more time. I worked on the quilt for a long time. Sometimes months would go by, and I wouldn't get any pieces sewn in it. Sometimes I had to wait to get to the right kind of cloth. I had blue calico and flowered blue silk for creeks and rivers, and greens and blue-greens for the fields, and white sheeting for roads. Mrs. liked to wear pink a lot, so Big House, the quarters, and finally the big house at North Farm, they were all pink. The quilt got bigger and bigger, and if folks knew what I was doing, no one said, but they came by the sewing room to pass the time of day whenever they could. "By the way, Clara," a driver might tell me, "I heard the master saying yesterday he wouldn't want to travel to Mr. Morris's place, 'cause it's over 20 miles north of here." Or someone would sit eating Cook's food and say, so as I could hear, "Word is, they gonna plant corn in 3 west fields on the Verona plantation this year." When the master went out hunting, Cook's husband was the guide. He'd come back and say, "That swamp next to home plantation is a nasty place. But listen up, Clara, and I'll tell you how I thread my way in and out of there as smooth as your needle in that cloth." Mostly we hid during the day and walked at night. When we got to North Farm, Jack slipped in through the darkness to find what cabin my mama at. Then we went in to get her and found a little sister I didn't know I had. Mama was so surprised. "Sweet Clara, you growed so big," her eyes just like I remembered, her arms strong around me. "Mama, I'm here for you. We're going north. We know the way." I was afraid they wouldn't come, but then Mama said yes. Young Jack carried my sister, Anna, and I held to Mama's hand. We kept on as fast as we could, skirting farms and towns and making our way through the woods. At last, one clear, dark night, we came to the Ohio River. The river was high, but I remembered the place on the quilt where I'd marked the crossing. We searched the brush along the banks until at last we found the little boat. "This was hid here by the folks in the Underground Railroad," I said. The boat carried us across the dark, deep water to the other side. Shivering and hungry and scared, we stood looking ahead. "Which way now?" Jack asked me. I pointed. The North Star was shining clear above us. "Up there through the woods, north to Canada." Aunt Rachel kept her word. The quilt is still there, at home plantation. People go look at it, even folks from neighboring farms. I know because some of them come and tell me how they used it to get free. But not all are as lucky as we are, and most never can come. Sometimes I wish I could sew a quilt that would spread over the whole land, and the people just follow the stitches to freedom as easy as taking a Sunday walk. And then there's the quilt. And so we'd stop here, and I'd let the students write again, so Hannah's going to write for a couple more minutes on the closure to the story and what her thoughts are. So Hannah is doing her last free response. Right. Why don't you go ahead and finish the thought that you're on? Do I have a volunteer to share their thoughts? Hannah!
I like how Clara sets a goal for finding her mom and reaches it. It shows that hard work pays off and the outcome is great and rewarding.
Okay, so this free response technique can be used in a classroom, and the process is you share the story and you allow the students time to write like Hannah has done on her free response paper, and then you read a few pages and then you stop again and let them write and you read a few more pages, and you just can do that throughout your whole story. Alright, for differentiation, for students who struggle with writing, you can draw a picture, and like on the one sheet that I had, there was a picture box on the bottom of it, so drawing a picture for somebody who is a struggling writer, that's something that can be useful. This process is really great for all ability students because there's no wrong answers, and it's allowing the students to just free write about whatever it is they think, making it easier for them to make connections to stories. And students can either use, a free response journal or a worksheet, and then that can also play into like your science, your social studies, your reading, which I had said earlier, as well as you can use it in the kindergarten classroom. And let's say now I did mine for the 3rd grade level. I would want to let my students write for about 3 minutes. Well, to up that, if you go into a 5th grade classroom and you want to use this strategy in your 5th grade classroom, well, allow them longer times to write. So maybe you want to do like 5 minutes. And, as you go up into middle school, maybe you're looking at 7 to 10 minutes of a free write if you just, read a really in-depth book. So this was my strategy on free response journal writing.